he could have been executed. And Roger Williams and his followers, 1636, formed the colony of Rhode Island. Now, originally, they wanted to send Roger Williams back to England. That didn't happen. Okay, so, now, Roger Williams and his followers bought the territory that became Rhode Island from the natives. Political freedom of Providence, universal manhood suffrage, ultimately changed to have a property qualification, opposed special privilege of any kind, freedom of opportunity for all. Rhode Island initially, by the way, this is not the motto on the license plates of Rhode Island, I don't think. The sewer, because the dumping ground for all unbelievers and religious dissenters. Rhode Island became a very liberal colony. In fact, if you were a Puritan, and you wanted to party, you went to Rhode Island. Okay, now, here we have a woman. Anne Hutchinson. It was very unusual for a woman to be as assertive as Anne Hutchinson was. In fact, it was known that after the Sunday religious gatherings in the local Puritan church, that there would be additional meetings done at the Hutchinson house. Threatened the control of men, patriarchal control, believed in direct revelation, carried logical extremes of Puritan doctrine of predestination, that is, God had already determined as to whether you would be saved or not, and said, oh, holy life was no sure sign of salvation. And if you were truly saved, you did not need to obey the law of either God or man. Okay. Now, why? Brought to trial in Massachusetts, 1638. Bragged that she had received her beliefs directly from God, that is, direct revelation. Now, the Puritans were really easy on Anne Hutchinson and her family and on Roger Williams, because they could just as easily executed both of them. Puritan leaders banned her. Her family went first to Rhode Island and then to New York. Now, unfortunately for Anne Hutchinson's family, in New York, all but one of her family were killed in an Indian attack. And the governor of Massachusetts said, yeah, God got her. Sorry. Okay, map of New England, in case you're interested. Okay, now here is something. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna put myself out on a limb. Don't stand too close, especially if you're something crappy. I believe, honestly, that in the world today, the climate is changing. Now, in the history of the planet that we call Earth, Earth has gone through many stages of warming and cooling. That's just exactly what the Earth does do. It is part of its nature. The thing is, and this is something, honestly, that has been discussed, debated, studied for well over 100 years. So it's nothing new that somebody, oh yeah, it's happening. the belief is, and this goes back at least 110 years, if not longer. The belief is that mankind, by pollution and other things, is speeding up the process of the earth heating up. That is impacting the climate of the earth. Now, I know that in our current political situation, that the political party in power, yeah, it's not happening. Well, whether they believe it or not, yeah, it's happening. Now, having gone there, in the mid-17th century, there's a mini ice age that hits the world. Part of what the earth does. It warms and it cools. Was it impacted by mankind? Not to any great extent. Okay. Suffering and desperation to the natives and Europeans in the Americas. Water, encouragement of winter urban life, people flocking to frozen ponds. That's where you caught frozen fish, by the way. London, the Thames was frozen over. Now, the Thames, to a large extent, I don't know if it's as far west as London, but it's very heavily influenced by the Atlantic. Okay, New England settlers had few conflicts with the natives. However, there was a war, 1636, 1638, the Pequot War. Well, Florida, Virginia, New England, New Mexico, again in Virginia. Well, if you lived in Maryland or in Virginia, Chesapeake colonies, your life expectancy, probably if you were male, was no more than 40 years. If you were an indentured servant, came to Virginia or Maryland, basically a white slave that worked for someone that was willing to pay your route to Virginia or Maryland. The probability that you were an indentured servant for 5 to 7 years, the probability of you surviving to the end of your indentured servitude was relatively small. That's going to cause a problem. In New England, people lived longer. People in New England were more literate. The first book that young children were taught to read was the Bible. Okay, well, going back in history a bit, you remember Portugal and all this kind of stuff, and the Portuguese actually were the first European nation to create islands in the Caribbean to produce sugar cane. Well, Barbados or in the Caribbean. The problem is the native populations died, so you need something to replace them. So there are two possibilities: the use of poor people from England, indentured servants that served 5 to 7 years. Now, if they were in then at the time, if you were lucky enough to complete your indentured servitude, you were supposed to be given land. Well, that's gonna cause another problem. Ultimately, what happens is that and this is a gradual decision. It's not like, oh, Tuesday we decide this, on Wednesday it's gonna happen. No. The decision is because of the issues with indentured servants and their potential entering into competition with planters, and the fact that the number of people willing to be indentured servants in England was decreasing, that the decision was made, we're going to start using African slaves. Now, if you were an indentured servant, let's say in Virginia, and you were away from your, for lack of a better term, your farm, could anyone tell that you were an indentured servant? No, not necessarily. They would say, oh, you're poor. Yeah. But there was no defining bit of information that would decide that you were indeed an indentured servant. Now, you bring in an African slave, guess what? Because of the color of their skin, boom, 99% are already slaves. Now, here's the interesting, well, the unfortunate thing. If you were a slave, you were a piece of property. You were not a human being, you were a piece of property. That the person that bought you could do anything that they wanted to do with you. That's scary. Okay, activities, sugar making. This was, how on earth? An island in the Caribbean, sugar plantation in the Caribbean. Of course, the overseers were white. The laborers were black. If there was an uprising among the laborers against you, where did you go? You better hope that you had a ship that you could jump on. Okay, Caribbean colonies. Now, of course, a lot of this initially was settled by the Spanish, then eventually the French, then the English. By the way, this island here, Hispaniola, Spanish island. Today, the western half of it is Haiti. The eastern half of it is the Dominican Republic. Okay. Well, the thing is, there are plentiful slaves coming from Africa. And here is the unfortunate situation. Initially, the African individuals that became slaves were captured by other African societies and were either traded or sold to Europeans. Well, pretty soon the Europeans got the idea, hey, we can cut out the middleman and do it on our own, which they did do. And the situation was that, of course, the Europeans went further inland. So if you were indeed a human being that was captured by European slavers, your probability of surviving was relatively low. Okay, African slaves benefit of lifelong servitude. Slaves harvesting sugar cane. of course, with the issue of the white overseers. Okay. Now, 17th century, in the Caribbean and in America, slave deaths exceeded births. In the Barbados, planters enacted strict slave codes designed to maintain order and to prevent slave uprisings. Constant fear. Okay. Now, we have a division. New England, of course, Puritans, large family. If there were slaves in New England, they were household servants. Chesapeake colonies, that is Maryland, South, tobacco and other crops relied on slave labor, totally. Okay, let's see. Can I do this or not? Maybe or maybe not. I don't know. He said. Okay, do I have another one in here? Hey. It worked. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Okay. 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 Wait. Well, all right. Okay. Let me go through this very quickly, kind of, sort of, because I think I've talked about this. Elizabeth I was the last of the Tudors. Elizabeth I, known as the Virgin Queen. By the way, when Jamestown was settled in 1604, under the leadership of what would become James I of England, the territory was named Virginia. It was named after Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. Okay, so anyway, Elizabeth dies, no heir. The last of the Stuarts, the last of the Tudors, the next hierarchy or the next regime to take place is the Stuarts from Scotland. This combines the kingdoms of England and Scotland. Well, the Tudors had been, for the most part, especially Elizabeth, involved with the people. Now, not that there wasn't unrest against her, there was, but the Stuarts believed in the divine right of kings, meaning that they did not have to pay attention to anybody. Okay, radical Protestant religious group during Elizabeth, wanted to purify the Church of England, the Puritans. Okay, it's under James I that the separatists and later the Presbyterians and Congregationalists leave England. Okay, James I dies. He is succeeded by his son, Charles I. His son is a